the state starts to use terror against the individual in an effort to push back democracy. So we should worry about the fact that the state has essentially legalized torture of these marginal people, people who are marginal to us, because what always happens in a fascist shift is that the state will start by abusing people that no one in the mainstream really identifies with much. You know, in Germany, it was anarchists, communists, homosexuals, Jews, gypsies, thank you. And then what always happens is there's a blurring of the line, and the noose starts to catch up more and more members of civil society, mainstream society, and it's always the same cast of characters. Us, basically. Journalists, editors, opposition leaders, labor leaders, and outspoken clergy. So and Germany is so instructive in this regard because, people don't realize that it didn't start with crematoria. That what happens when you create a secret prison system where torture takes place is it always metastasizes. It starts out little and informal and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And like in Berlin in 1931, 1932, torture was still illegal. The Nazis weren't even in power. They were a minority party. It was still a democracy. There were opposition, there were marches, there was, everything was as it should have been. But the SA, a paramilitary force, we'll get to that, started to create these makeshift torture cellars where they would torment these marginal people, and everyone knew about it. They thought it was funny. There were cartoons about it in the German press. It's like, that show 24. It's like, that's funny. Everyone accepted it. But then it doesn't take too long before the line starts to be blurred. So why is this so urgently relevant to us? Most Americans don't realize that the president now claims the power to say to any one of us, what's your name? Raul, you're an enemy combatant. Or let's find someone who really looks like a soccer mom, a Republican soccer mom, okay? Republican, you have a really nice purse. Republican soccer mom. Yes. Pardon me? Anne, enemy combatant. No, it doesn't matter. You can be innocent. You can be Republican. You can be a devoted, evangelical. It doesn't matter. Enemy combatant is a status offense. Your innocence does not protect you. Your party affiliation does not protect you. And if he says, and Naomi, enemy combatant, it's like Mother May I. If he, on his say-so alone, he can name you or me an enemy combatant, and they can't torture us yet, but they can take us to a Navy brig to a 10 by 12-foot cell and keep us in American citizens, innocent American citizens, in solitary confinement for up to 3 years, making it difficult for us to see our families, to contact our lawyers, difficult to have charges filed, okay? That's what they did to Jose Padilla. Now, he was not so great, but they can do it to any one of us. Now, what psychiatrists know is that prolonged isolation, solitary confinement, makes healthy, sane people insane. So we're at this kind of incredibly fragile moment because democracies don't close down like that in a kind of steady progressive line. They close down more in what Malcolm Gladwell would call a series of tipping points. And so, and then there reaches a point at which democracy can no longer heal democracy. But that point comes really fast when it comes. So the first time that the state made it legal to torture people, that was one of those vertical lines. And the first time that this kid was tasered in Florida, I think that was one of those vertical lines. I was not surprised to find that he was tasered at the University of Florida. I know, it's not appropriate for kids. I'm sorry. It's not. I know. I don't let my daughter listen. I don't. It's like she has to watch America's Next Top Model off the record. The daughter of the beauty myth does watch America's Next Top Model, the beauty myth author. But when this kid was tasered, I wasn't surprised to learn, because I was reading Goebbels, that it took place at the University of Florida, which is answerable to the Board of Regents, which is answerable to the state legislature, which has close ties to Jeb Bush. because Goebbels pioneered this practice of using state legislatures to put pressure on state universities to jeopardize and put pressure on academics and students. But that was one of those vertical lines. And for me, you know, everyone in a closing society has their own boundary at which point they start to shut up. So I'm still talking to you in public, in this public place, and you're still here. I applaud you. For me personally, the day I open the New York Times and read that someone I identify with, an editor, a journalist, has been named an enemy combatant and is in solitary confinement, that's the day I'm not going to be talking to you anymore. Because at that point, I will be too scared. So that's how society closes down. And when these tipping points start to come thick and fast, it happens really quickly. So that is why we should worry about a secret prison system where torture takes place. The third thing that always happens when would-be despots are seeking to close an open society is that they create a paramilitary force. And what do you say to that? Who is that? That's right. That's exactly right. Now, you know, really think about it. You can't close down a democracy without a paramilitary force. You can't, because people are like, you know, I'm not going to be pushed around by you. But once you have a paramilitary force, you can send that paramilitary force to intimidate civilians. And then it doesn't matter if you've still got the, you know, essential institutions of civil society functioning, because people are really just too intimidated to push back. This is what happened. Like, people forget Italy was a democracy, a working parliamentary democracy, when Mussolini started to send what he called arditi, black shirts, paramilitary guys, out to scare and intimidate civilians. You know, last summer in the Portland airport, people were asked by TSA officials, Transportation Security Administration officials, to drink baby formula and even human breast milk. Remember that? After the scare about the guy who was carrying liquids onto the plane. So this was a familiar scene to me. This was one of those echoes, because Mussolini, the black shirts forced civilians to drink emetics, like laxatives, at gunpoint, and this was so intimidating, it worked so well that Hitler imitated it, and the brown shirts forced people to drink gross liquids. And, you know, this is a new scene for America, armed agents forcing people to drink gross liquids at gunpoint. But when you know, look at Germany too, you know, they weren't a majority party when the brown shirts were sent to intimidate civilians, to bully people, beat people. So right now, and by the way, the founders, like, why do we have the Second Amendment? Gosh, no, it just makes me crazy. This is what makes me crazy. We're in an era when ordinary people feel separated from the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I did. You know, I have a good education, and I had to, like, sit a lawyer friend down. I mean, like, literally sit a lawyer friend down and say, okay, you have to explain to me what due process means. What is due process, like beginning to end? Because what is due process? Like, who knows exactly what due process is? And we're all really well educated.
Notice and opportunity.
Pardon me?
Notice and opportunity.
Notice and opportunity, that's right. So we're in a time when, like, this professional class of pundits and politicians and constitutional scholars are tasked, or task themselves with worrying about the Constitution, worrying about liberty. And we're told, don't worry about it. You know, it's not your business. So I didn't even know how the Second Amendment worked or why it protected me until I did this reading. And the founders knew the danger that a paramilitary force poses to civilians, because King George's men were wandering around bullying colonists, breaking into their homes. This is why a blanket warrant is such a big deal. They would have a blanket warrant, just say, okay, fine, I can break into your home, take your stuff, the way the state took Brandon Mayfield's computer out of his home in Oregon, a yuppie, you know, like any of us. And I say that in quotation marks, but he was like a total mainstream American, innocent guy. They broke into his home, went through his kids' stuff, took his stuff. And the founders knew, you know, that these mercenaries were like harassing women, molesting women, scaring and intimidating civilians. So they said, you can't have a standing army that's not answerable to the people. So Blackwater is now in the news. It has close ties to the White House. And Blackwater is in the news right now in Iraq for massacring 17 civilians 2 or 3 weeks ago. And they got a slap on the wrist. But what most Americans don't know is that Blackwater is already operating on Main Street, USA. They were invited by the Department of Homeland Security to patrol the streets of New Orleans in the wake of Katrina. And they just got a $1 billion contract to work more intimately in the United States. Their business plan calls for increased deployment in America in the event of a natural disaster or a public emergency. And the Defense Authorization Act of 2007 makes it easier for the president on his say-so alone to declare a public emergency, because he says there's a public emergency. Not only that, but a new law has made it easier for the president to declare martial law by federalizing the National Guard. Now, the National Guard is supposed to be answerable to the people, to governors, right? The president can now take the National Guard of Alabama and send them here to Washington State and deploy them to enact curfew and martial law here in Washington State over the objections of the governors of Alabama and Washington State, and not tell Congress about it till after the fact. So this is exactly what the founders were trying to go, no, no, you can't do this. This is a catastrophe. The fourth thing, and then I'll just zip ahead because these are, hard to absorb. The fourth thing that a would-be dictator always does is to create a surveillance apparatus aimed at ordinary citizens. Now, it doesn't take much for this kind of surveillance apparatus to be effective. In East Germany, everyone thought they had a Stasi file, but only 10% of the people actually did turn out to have a Stasi file. You don't need to surveil everyone in order, if everyone thinks they're being surveilled, that's inhibiting. Why is this so, personally freaking out to me, this surveillance? And by the way, this is driven by a profit motive. America isn't driven by ideologies the way that Italy or Germany were. But America is driven by profit very often. And it's quite extraordinary. When the Berlin Wall fell, the third of the US economy that is defense manufacturing was facing a declining market share because we lost our global enemy. And what do you have to do if you're losing a global enemy and you're the defense industry? Make a new enemy, exactly. They were looking at a real economic catastrophe unless they could hype a new enemy, enter the global war on terror. And what happened was that these weapons manufacturers who used to make Cold War weapons shifted their manufacturing to what's called the security industrial complex technologies, surveillance and security. And they have lobbyists, and their lobbyists work closely with Homeland Security. And it's this, again, multi-billion-dollar industry. And so the best way to make sure that you're going to have continued profits is not just to hype a relatively minor enemy, serious but minor, the way that England and Spain sees the terror threat as serious but not a global war, right? Gordon Brown has said it's a crime, not a cause. It's not a global war. The way you make sure to generate profit is to be sure that the enemy you create is us, that we are the enemy in need of surveillance. So why is this so personal for me? For about 1.5 years, every time I got on a plane, are you guys okay? Yeah. No, I always ask this at this point in the talk because, it's a lot. But I do admire Americans because they're like, we can handle it. No, seriously. I sometimes feel overwhelmed by this stuff. I often do. Well, for 1.5 years, every time I got on a plane, I would get a quadruple S, high-risk security threat symbol on my boarding pass. Now, I'm a short Jewish girl from New York. And in what way do I fit a global terrorist profile? The short Jewish girls with their credit cards rampaging through the globe, the big threat. But